best in radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Is the world on the brink of a new era of individual freedom? Are governments just getting to the point where they're so expensive that they can no longer afford to repress you and your rights? Well, Bob Hoye, you're probably familiar with him. You've heard him on the show before. He heads up an outfit by the name of Institutional Advisors. With us now, Bob, welcome back.
Good to be with you, Kerry.
So you really think that this era of central banking and centralized power within governments is coming to an end?
Yeah. This is my financial and political historian side coming in, but I did the research ages ago, and the big model is that, shall I do that? I get to ask the questions and provide the answers. And
sure.
Okay. The first question is, when were the greatest experiments in authoritarian government in the senior economy? And you go back in history and you come up with 3rd century in Rome when it turned into a police state. Then the 16th century when the Catholic Church was the main organization and it became corrupted by authoritarian monsters. And then the next one was the 20th century. This then leads to another question, which is, when were the periods of most chronic price inflation in the senior economy? Well, 3rd century, and then the 16th century, and then the 20th century, and still running. So the two are linked together, and that is because the bureaucracy it goes out of control in trying to control people, and the experiment in unlimited government requires unlimited funding, so then they have to supplement confiscatory taxation with currency depreciation. So here you are. Then the next question on this one is, how long did each one last? In Rome's case, it took a century for the bureaucracy to consume or confiscate all of the wealth and ruin the economy such that people left. And then in the 16th century, it took about 100 years. There seems to be kind of a tribal memory where people realize that, hey, these guys with the power, they're taking all the money, and there's nothing to their promises about the good life. And then in the 20th century, you can tell that this, or at least I sense, an ending action in here. So let's look back on those 3 events. And in Rome's case, the wealth had been accumulated in Rome through conquest and tribute, and it became irresistible to the bureaucracy. And the guise of wisdom was provided by a saying that appears in the literature about the genius of the emperor. That meant the genius of whatever the government was at the time. And they were going to own it all and run it all until it just collapsed. And they, of course, did that horrendous price inflation. And Diocletian was a very capable administrator, and price and wage controls backed up by the sword, and it didn't work. So you can understand why the system collapsed. So then there was no real accumulation of wealth until beginning the early 1500s, when all of the bullion, particularly silver bullion, started coming over from the New World. Spain was the supreme power, and an unbelievable influx of wealth, but it wasn't enough for their ambition for unlimited government. So then they had to supplement it with borrowing money and currency depreciation, and they went broke about 3 times during the 1500s and eventually exhausted themselves. And in order to get out of that one, everybody was religious, so then they had to form a new protest religion the Protestant, whereby the family was good and business was sound, and let's all be free and make money and live and look after our families. So it was quite a reformation. It was more than the historians call it the Protestant Reformation, but I think it should call it the Great Reformation, because everything was reviewed, and that which wasn't working or was intolerable was reduced or limited or even hopefully eliminated. So here we are. Then you had, through beginning of the late 1900s, an accumulation of wealth that has been extraordinary. But this one wasn't from conquest and tribute. It was from innovations in business techniques and applying science and applied science to getting goods and services out, and it's become wonderfully successful. But again, that wealth had to be controlled by the ambition of the bureaucrats, and here's where you are. They are becoming unbelievably intrusive, and they're using the most extraordinary notions to control people, like the idea that the central bank can really run the economy has been absurd. But now you've got this idea that they can manage the climate. I mean, the audacity is incredible. So anyways, but until recently, people more or less accept this idea that the Fed is there to run things, and then whenever there was a crash like 08, 09, they become suspect that maybe the Fed isn't working, and it wasn't. And now we're in the boom, and which is getting old, and they're having their chance. So the way I look at it, Kerry, is that the next bear market contraction recession will then definitely prove that the concept of central banking is absurd. And, students of the market have known that for a long time, but in the good times, the public goes along with it. And then at this next set of bad times, I think they will become critical. And then the other one is the audacity to believe that the climate can be managed. And then again, here we have an unusual cooling trend. At least beginning 17 years ago, the advance in temperatures flattened and has been going sideways, mainly because
you're sounding like Bob. You're talking like a climate denier here. If I didn't know better, I'd think you didn't believe in climate change, and you're sounding like it's all a big hoax here.
Well, it is.
Tell me it's not so here.
I'll tell you what. You know what they called the Protestants? That protest. They were the deniers at the time of the powerful state. So here I am. Actually, it's my physics side, because I took a degree in geophysics a long time ago. And one of the features of science has always been skepticism. And you ask the question. And as I say, the global warmers, their models are not working, and they're quickly being seen as not working. That mankind generates CO2, and that drives the temperature up. Because the medieval period was warmer than recent for longer, and of course that theory about industrial mankind, the evils thereof, that didn't exist in the 1100s and 1200s. And then, of course, their models did not forecast the latest flattening out of temperatures. And there were two solar physicists by the name of Penn and Livingston in the 1990s began their work that expected the decline in solar activity. You went down like solar cycle 23 was down to the lowest sunspot count since 1912 or 1913, and then solar cycle 24, which is just sort of peaking now, is much lower than any of the previous peaks on the 11-year solar cycle. And as a matter of fact, there was a chart I saw this morning pointing out that this winter in the United States is the coldest since, guess what, 1912. So I think the body of evidence is growing against the nonsense of climate warming. And so it just has to get, people who study these things, either the business history and financial history, which then puts the endeavors of central banking in perspective. And then on the other side, if you look at temperature history, that's also putting the endeavors of these promoters on climate change in perspective as well. But what you need to have is the public to become aware that the story is not working and that they've just been using these stories about managing the economy and managing the climate to extend their authority and intrude in everyone's life. So I think the public is very capable of judging the condition and the promotion. And all it will take to really advance this would be the beginning of the next bear market in the stock market, the next credit contraction, and the next recession, all of which maybe within 2 months we should know whether it's at hand or not. And then the other is Mother Nature keeps the cooling trend on.
We're very close, aren't we, to the next credit contraction? I mean, it seems like it could be any day now, right?
Yeah, you've had the lower grade bonds. Oh, they rallied something unbelievable. Everybody reaching for yield and using junk, or the ETF J and K. It reached a momentum hot peak about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think the RSI was at 72, and then on the last big rally in lower grade bonds, it peaked out at almost the 1st of May at an RSI of slightly higher than that. So we've had an outstanding rally, and also the one that we used last year to call that break, and it almost ended up in a mini panic in low grade bonds, was that you can get a seasonal trend change. If you have a hot junk bond market going into April, somewhere in there you're going to get the seasonal change. Now, if you want to go back to 1998, 89, was it 89 or 99, when you had the LTCM disaster? That was 1998. Yeah. It was a wager by a very aggressive hedge fund against with narrowing spreads. And then you had the tendency of spreads to narrow into April and reverse in May, and that's what happened. And then you had the problem then was exacerbated by the discovery that Russia had a problem with their bond market. And then LTCM was taken out. I think it was $4.5 billion, which was size money in those days. And here we are sitting here now. You have spreads have widened a little, but not what they could do. And you have now a problem in the Russian stock market. And actually that was preceded by problems, financial problems coming out of Asia due to too much speculation and different central banks running out of reserve currencies and that sort of stuff. So you're having something similar that has led to great setbacks in the credit markets and lowered stock market prices. So we're awfully close, Kerry, to the next credit crisis.
And we're going to talk more about that up next on the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. I'm Kerry Lutz.
Do you have Medicare or health insurance through your employer? If so, listen up. The healthcare reform wasn't written to save the healthcare industry or even to lower healthcare costs. Shoot, it isn't even designed to insure the uninsured. It's just a temporary political byproduct. Like a flat rock you step on in a swiftly moving stream, Obamacare is just a means to an end. Want to learn more about Obama's ultimate objective? Then you'll want to review our latest research presentation found on oclies.com. In it, a health expert and industry insider explains what you think you know about caring for your health is about to drastically change in 2014. Plus, he details the simple steps you could take to save thousands of dollars per year in health costs. It's free for you to preview at oclies.com. Don't waste time. What you don't know about the healthcare reform could hurt you and your family.
And we are back with Bob Hoye. So, Bob, the clock is ticking on authoritarian central governments. Up until this point, the U.S. has had the least worst authoritarian central government, but the noose has been tightening, over the past, say, 2 decades. And Canada probably slightly behind the U.S. in authoritarianism, Australia Western Europe, but things are definitely getting worse here. But you're the optimist of the crowd. But once this collapse in authoritarianism occurs, what do you see rushing in to take its place? Is it anarchy, or is it a less restrictive system, Bob?
I wouldn't say anarchy. I think you're looking at, you've got people, the protests in Ukraine were for freedom. And then there was pictures here I saw this morning of protests in Turkey. And then you're getting more towards protests in Venezuela, for example. So, but in the 1920s and early 30s in Europe, the street protests were between National Socialists and International Socialists, both totalitarian systems.
It's quite a choice.
And yeah, and this is where the archaic terms left and right came from, was to distinguish the difference between National Socialists, which were right, and International Socialists, which were left. But here now, if you take a look at, as I mentioned, in Turkey or in anywhere else where you have street protests going on, it is for freedom. And it's the government that is trying to hammer this down. In the United States, you have the Tea Party, which is condemned. But they want freedom, more freedom, less government, sovereignty of the individual, and let's get rid of these intrusive guys who really don't know what they're doing. And the administration under Obama is absolutely incredible. He's working on the Saul Alinsky model, whereby you overwhelm the economy and the middle class through overwhelming the welfare system and using community organizations. So at least the Marxist communists, they had as an objective the perfect man and any means to get there. Whereas with Obama and Alinsky, it is, let's just take her all apart. We don't have any goal at the end of it other than to have it all organized. And he's being remarkably successful at it. And because the opposition missed a chance in getting control of the Senate. I think that could have constrained things a little. But at any rate, when I look at it here, it's like a runaway commodity. The higher it goes, the more damage it does, and then eventually it exhausts and collapses. So this thing is a runaway experiment in politics, and it's doing immense damage, and it'll collapse because it's just plain unaffordable. And I think that becomes the key, where the public says, I'm not getting my money out of this deal. It's not worth it. And that was the case in communist Europe in the late 80s under those protests. I guess the best named one was Solidarity out of Poland. And they took a look at what the governing classes were taking out of the system and what they were promising and saying, hey, this doesn't work up, and took on a police state that murdered people. Whereas at the moment, there was snipers at work in Kiev, but it wasn't full state murder, just sort of nasty business. But I don't see in U.S. or in Canada the state going that far to employ state murder.
Yet.
So
we don't
just
know.
Put yourself in East Germany in the 1980s.
Yeah, the Stasi.
The risk that they took on for freedom was a magnificent stand, and they won. So then, since the late 90s, you've had Putin there, and he wants to restore the Soviet Union. But I look at this as that the bringing down of the Berlin Wall was the start of the Great Reformation, And what Putin is doing is a counter-reformation move, which is understandable. So you got a market for politics the same as you have a market for credit and you have a market for stocks. So at the moment, the opposition to big government is on a short squeeze, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then actually, if you look back on it, back in last October, when I gave a paper in New York on this subject, I noted that the Republicans were very oversold, if you look at it in marketplace terms, because at that moment, everybody thought the Republican Party was going to collapse and didn't have a chance and everything else. So there's some recovery going on, but this won't change until the market rolls over, and because the state funds itself through inflation, whether it's inflation in commodities or inflation in lately financial assets. That's how it funds itself, and so long as this inflation is on and of financial assets now, then the world looks rosy. So this is where, again, it comes down to the financial markets, and if they roll over, they look like they could be starting, then the ability of statists to fund themselves will be diminished. So it's ending action, and we should look actually to another example where in the early part of the 1900s, when communists really became ambitious, and you had soaring commodity prices, and they ran right up to about 1920, and then crashed. Now, in the United States, that brought an end to the great experiment in authoritarian government. And there was even one point where the U.S. government had nationalized the railroads, and they then went against that. And so, same thing even in communist Russia, they turned with the crash in commodities in 1921 from strict communism to sort of a flexible socialism where some price mechanism came in. So here we are here now. You had a major commodity high, the last one in 2011, a long decline. You now have a financial market that's close to rolling over. So I think the whole world is about to experience another step towards freedom. I think it looks good.
Well, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. And, I don't know where it's going to end, but I think you raised some really interesting points here, and we're in for quite a ride, that's for sure. What about the price of gold and silver throughout all this turmoil, Bob? Where are we heading there?
We're right at a cusp in here on the price of gold, and it may make a rally. But to look at the bigger picture, definitely since September 2012, on that high for gold and silver, the action has swung so that they have been in their bear market, as stocks and low-grade bonds have been in a bull market. And I like this opposing action. And so what is happening on the big picture is that the stock market and the low-grade bond market are setting a cyclical peak, as more or less overlapping. The gold sector has been working on a cyclical bottom. So, and I think the full recognition of the bear market in, say, the S&P would be the start of a cyclical bull market for gold. Now, let's talk about that and emphasize that this would be gold in real terms, in its purchasing power. Where it does in dollar terms, who's to know? Because one of the problems, or actually one of the features of a post-bubble world is that the senior currency becomes consistently strong against most other currencies and most commodities. So let's put it this way, that when the stock market, the big stock market's getting hit, gold shares will get hit as well. But at the end of, say, a year and a half from around now, the gold stocks should be net very much higher, and the S&P net should be very much lower.
And we have to end it at that. So just tell us where we find you, Bob.
Yeah, we can find me at institutionaladvisors.com, or giving the internet the way things are these days, if you just Google my name, Bob Hoye, Bobhoye, and bang, that gets you right into all of our publications and into the system. The way we work it is that those wanting to know what we do, we just put you on the mailing list. Like, we don't send out back issues or anything like that. Just put you on the mailing list. And after 5 or 6 weeks, if you like it, sign up. If you don't, that's it.
All right.
And we welcome subscribers. We've got right up to major financial institutions. Some of the mining companies take our research, and high net worth and individuals. So
excellent. And of course, go over to financialsurvivalnetwork.com, which you're probably at already, listening to this interview. Click the show notes. You get right to Bob's website, institutionaladvisors.com. And you can check out the subscription options there. Bob, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for being on.
Kerry, good to be with you. Look forward to the next time.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.